given day. We all do some pretty different kinds of things though. And this year we also have a school psychology intern, Ms. Braverman, who is also working up in our offices. So it's kind of cool because I've been doing this job for almost 20 years, but she is at the beginning of her journey. So she may be someone you might want to ask some questions to at some point as well. So a little bit about me just personally first. I like to start with some personal information. I am first gen, like I think a lot of you might be. First gen means that my parents were not born in this country. This is my mom's green card photo. My mom immigrated here when she was 13, and so that is her picture, I think in 1969, when she arrived in this country. She's from Mexico, my dad's from Colombia. Both of them were born in their respective countries. So on both sides of my family, I'm first gen. And so if you're first gen, you know that that comes with some special stresses and pressures. See a lot of head nodding, yeah. A couple other things about me that I'm going to get into. I went to Chapman University for my graduate work. That's where I got my master's degree, my education specialist degree, and my credential to be a school psychologist. So not a doctorate level, which there is a question about that I hope I'll get to spend some time answering. This is me at my graduate school graduation. And it's kind of a fun picture for me to share because that professor, I had all 3 years of graduate school, and I've now taught with him alongside him. I teach at Chapman in their school psychology program, and I've taught with him for 17 years. And he's actually retiring, so this is the last year I'll be teaching with him. So I like sharing that picture because that's when I was just starting my journey. A lot of you asked about burnout and life and work balance and how do I manage things. I'm going to get a little more into that, but I have hobbies that I really enjoy. One of them is running. I run half marathons. I usually run about 2 or 3 a year, but the one I run every year, no matter what, is the Long Beach half marathon. And that's me, I think, running my very first half marathon about 9 or 10 years ago. I think that picture from that time. I also really like the outdoors. I like getting outside. So I go backpacking and camping a lot. And so last year, or actually earlier this year, I did something I've been wanting to do for a really long time, which is I backpacked part of the Trans-Catalina Trail, which is a trail that goes all the way across Catalina Island. And I only did about 15 or 16 miles of it because I only had 2 nights. But my goal is to do the whole thing at some point. So that's a picture of me doing that. I have 2 dogs that I really love. That's Stan patrolling my backyard. They're named after Beatles songs. That's Maxwell and Julia. And another one of the school psychologists here at Fountain Valley made this, and it always makes me laugh because it does a nice job of describing what school psychologists do. The truth is we do a little bit of everything. All right, so I have some information that I brought, some flyers. There may not be enough for everyone in here, and I'm happy to share an electronic copy as well. But what do school psychologists actually do? Well, we do a little bit of everything. We're experts in learning, behavior, mental health, and school systems. So basically every aspect of being in a school psychologist is really an expert in that. Okay? It means that we're multidisciplinary. We're one of the few people on a campus that are multidisciplinary, meaning we have expertise in lots of different areas. What do? We provide academic, behavioral, and mental health interventions. I like to think about it as if there's something in the way of a student learning and being successful in school on the way to a diploma, school psychologists try to get those things out of the way. We try to remove those barriers. Who do we support? Well, really everybody, but especially learners, students who are struggling for lots of different reasons, whether it's learning disabilities, mental health concerns, or maybe they're new to the country and still figuring things out and maybe not native English speakers, and that's why they're struggling. We can support all kinds of different students. Where do we work? Really mostly in public schools. I'm going to show you a better breakdown of that. but actually in a lot of pretty diverse settings. But the main place you're going to find a school psychologist is in a public school setting. Part of the reason for that is we are written into federal law. School counselors are not written into federal law, school psychologists are. So that's one of the reasons you're going to find us in just about every public school that receives federal funding. Now, the National Association of School Psychologists recommends a ratio of about 1 to 500 students. Now, if you think we have 5 school psychologists here for about 3,500 students, that sounds pretty close. That sounds like we got one school psych for about 750 kids or so. But it doesn't really shake down like that, because we all have our own unique areas and jobs and things we serve. I'm actually responsible for closer to 3,000 students. So while this is the recommended ratio, the way it actually looks in practice is a little different, okay? Let's move on. I mentioned a minute ago that I was going to share with you where school psychologists work, and as you can see, 85% of us are in traditional school settings just like this, public schools, all right? But you can also find us in charter schools. You can find us in public and private schools, charter schools. Sometimes you find us in colleges and universities, hospitals and medical settings. Very, very, very few of us work in the State Department of Ed. I think it's like a handful. And then sometimes you can find us working in private practice, meaning they sit in an office and someone comes to them and they do mostly one-on-one kinds of work with students, whether it's counseling or maybe doing assessment to try to figure out academic strengths and weaknesses. That was never for me. I never wanted to work in private practice. A lot of students ask me a lot of the time, why aren't you like a counselor in an office where people can just come and talk to you and you can kind of give advice or do whatever you're going to do? Because I like this. I like working as part of a team. I like interacting with teachers. I actually liked school pretty much. I was good at school. Like, I was good at being a student and like following the rules. I was like that. And so school, like, it always just sort of made sense that I was going to be in a school setting. But that said, and I just shared this with somebody recently, I had a bachelor's degree in psychology already after spending 2 years thinking I was pre-med and going to be a doctor, by the way. And I had never even heard the phrase school psychologist. No one had ever mentioned school psychology to me. I never heard of a school psychologist. I did not know what a school psychologist was, and I already had my bachelor's degree. Okay, so y'all are already way ahead of me, because I definitely didn't know about a school psych when I was in high school. We can move on. So, one thing people want to know is, yeah, but how much money you make? Well, I probably would be making more money if I'd actually gone and become a doctor. But as you can see, school psychologists do pretty well, with the western part of the country being where we tend to do the best in terms of our salary. But it really is going to vary a whole lot district to district. But kids ask about that kind of thing a lot of the time, so I thought I would share that with you. But the truth is, there's a wide variation in how much school psychologists make. One of the things I always say is we spend more time in school than teachers and counselors and even most administrators, and we're deeper in debt. So sometimes it helps them to make a little more money because we have more debt to pay off. We can move forward. All right. So now I want to get at some of the more specific questions y'all asked about. One thing that came up a lot in your questions was mental health, mental illness. What do we see? What do we deal with? The top two things I see in terms of mental health are anxiety and depression. Absolutely across the board, Ms. Braverman, right? Anxiety and depression. That's what we're talking to kids about almost every day. All right? And why it's important for school psychologists to know how to respond to anxiety and depression is because between 75 and 80% of kids in schools that are in need of mental health services don't actually get the help they need. That's a lot of kids, right? When they do get help, 70 to 80% of those kids get the help they need at school. So that's why it's really critical that school psychologists know how to respond to mental health. A lot of you asked in the questions I saw and that I was provided, a lot of you wanted to know about that mental health piece. Then I got a question that was like, well, what do you do? What's the routine? How do you address mental health needs? And the fact is that it's really going to be different for every student. There's no one size fits all, like if you have this problem, we do this. That's not how mental health works. It's going to be very unique and very individual because the truth is it's going to affect everyone individually, okay? But what we know is that if mental health needs don't get addressed, right, we're going to see increased risk for suspension, expulsion, dropout, and possibly even entering the juvenile justice system, meaning like incarceration, arrest, things like that. So school psychs addressing mental health needs can really prevent not just kind of negative things happening to kids, but also things that we don't want to see as a society, which is incarceration rates that are very high, right? Particularly for students of color. We know that Black and brown students are disproportionately entering the juvenile justice system. And so school psychs are also like advocates to try to prevent that from happening. And part of how we do that is by responding to mental health needs. Okay, so I'm going to respond to some of the specific questions I was asked because I still have time. Okay, so one of the things that you all wanted to know is what's a typical schedule like? What's a daily schedule? Ms. Braverman, when we have a plan for the day, how often does that plan go exactly as we plan it out according to schedule?
Rarely. You have to be very adaptable.
Yep. You gotta be like, well, I guess I was gonna do this, but now I gotta drop that and go do this. So can be kind of chaotic. So I really like what Ms. Braverman just said. You have to be adaptable, you have to be flexible, so you gotta be willing to kind of like put something off to the side and manage your time on the go. And sometimes you're not gonna get done the thing you wanted to get done, okay? One of the things I do is I am more likely and more willing to come early and stay late than to take work home. There was a lot of questions about life-work balance, and so I'm gonna come back to that. When I say part of how I balance myself is by spending time outdoors, another part of how I balance myself is I don't take work home if I can help it. I will come in early and I will stay late. This morning I was here by 7, sometimes I'm here by 6:30. Some days I'm here until 4, 5, or 6 to get things done. I would rather do that than take my work home, okay? The other thing that I do that is unique is I don't live around here. That's part of how I maintain balance. I don't live here. I go home and I don't run into you guys at the grocery store, right? And that's not because I don't like you. It's not because I don't love my students and working with kids, especially all of you, but I need to be able to have some separation, and that's just me. Other people live right around the corner, and I'm sure you all have run into your teachers at things, right? In the grocery store, or when you're getting a haircut or something, you're seeing people you know. I don't want that in my life. I like more of a boundary, so I don't live in the area. And that's what works for me. But do I go to athletic events? Yes. Do I go show up and cheer when our teams are somewhere that I can get to? Yes. Do I show up at school dances? Yeah. So I still do some of those other things, but I need to live away from where I work. Totally a personal decision, but that's one of the ways I achieve balance. Okay? A lot of you asked about this. Actually, no. This is one of the questions I was provided, and I love this. What are some things that students can do for themselves and others to reduce the likelihood of mental health disorders or mental illness? Well, minimizing the stigma around it is the first thing I would say. Did any of you attend the Student Ambassadors for Mental Health meeting on Monday? We put it out to all the clubs. So we have a group on campus that is forming the Student Ambassadors for Mental Health. It's got members of various clubs and athletic teams on campus. And we got some funding from Orange County Department of Ed to do some work. Put on some presentations for students. students, teachers, and parents. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Some of you, if you've been here a few years, know that we do Wellness Week every year, which has a pretty strong mental health focus. So you're going to see a lot of our efforts during Wellness Week, but we're also going to try to do some more mental health related stuff. But if you're interested in that, connect with anyone in PAL, probably PAL. If you guys know anybody in PAL, that's the main one. But also LEAD and ASB would be folks you can contact about that. Or see Ms. Vasquez in supervision, because she's in charge of it. So what that kind of reminds me about is one of the other ways I achieve work-life balance, which is I think to myself that if I die tomorrow, I could die today, right? Someone will be hired to take my job, maybe Ms. Bravery, and work here will continue. People might be sad for a little while, but work here will continue. I am not so special that, like, if I die, things will fall apart. Okay, that's perspective taking that I have that helps me keep some balance in my life. Okay, and so one of the ways that I've seen this happen is I started Wellness Week a few years ago, kind of as like a let's just see what happens. I've been a school psychologist for 15 years. I've never done anything this big. Let's do Wellness Week and just leave. I didn't even pull it off. I didn't even think I was going to be able to pull it off, but I did with the help of students. The next year was COVID. We were shut down. No Wellness Week. And I was ready to go for part 2, man. Year 3, okay, we're back in hybrid. Some kids are on campus, some kids are not. Started thinking about Wellness Week, and ASB is like, Miss Elia, we got this. LEAD, Miss Elia, we're taking care of it. Guess what? Wellness Week happened with like that much of my input last year, and they did an amazing job. I don't know if y'all remember, but there were virtual events, in-person events. We had the puppies here. It was amazing. That's a good example of like, hey, I started it, but someone else is gonna finish it. That's how I feel about my job. Like, I could die tomorrow, and it's gonna keep going. And so my goal is kind of to start putting things in place that will facilitate that happening. But to also realize that I'm just one person, and I'm not like all that important. That's perspective for me that helps me. Okay? All right. You can go to the next slide. Here's some very, very specific cues that you had, and I'm going to give you some A's. Okay. I already talked about the most common mental health concerns, which are depression and anxiety. I'll say this again, how to help, which was a great question. Minimize the stigma, have these conversations, get involved with student ambassadors for mental health. Talk to people about it, let them know they're not alone, and if you're worried about yourself or someone else, get help. Come to an adult you trust. Text a tip is that anonymous number on the back of your ID cards where you can submit a concern, or you can email me directly, okay? I already talked about the uniqueness to each student in terms of how we help. It's really gonna depend. Some kids can have some mental health issues and still be able to just rock their classes, their athletics, their job, and their relationships, but inside they're really struggling. We're gonna probably help that person a little differently than the person that stopped coming to school, stopped doing schoolwork, quit their sports team, and doesn't hang out with their friends anymore. Those two kids might both have, let's say, a little depression, but they're gonna need different things, right? So it's super individual. That's why it's so important that you talk to somebody, because there's no kind of like if-then. There's no magic word, wand, or magic strategy that helps kids just automatically do better. Okay. I mentioned Stigma-Free OC. You can look up that hashtag on social media. There's a lot of cool stuff going on, and the student ambassadors for mental health are going to be doing a lot with that campaign as well. Now, one of the questions I did not put up there was study methods that require little work. Which, no such thing, my friends. Study methods are work because they work. But can you get more efficient at it, managing your time, doing things a little bit better? Absolutely. You need help with that? That's something we can help people with. Creating schedules, making it so maybe your studying is more efficient. But study methods that don't require work, that's like an oxymoron, right? That's like two things that don't actually go together. Studying requires some work, okay? One question was about what the difference between a psych doctorate versus a PhD. A